I found the job listing in late April, posted on a state forestry board website that looked like it hadn't been redesigned since 2003. Fire lookout position, seasonal 3 months, June through August. The pay was decent, not great, but they were offering free housing in the tower itself and no living expenses at all, so you could basically save everything you made. The listing said the previous occupant had left mid-season due to a personal emergency, and they needed someone to take over immediately. I didn't think much about that part. People leave jobs all the time. I drove out to Deschutes National Forest in Oregon on a Tuesday morning. Met a guy named Garrett from the Forest Service at a gravel turnoff about 6 miles from the main road, and he drove me the rest of the way up in a service truck, because the road was too rough for my car. The tower was called Paulina Peak Lookout, though it wasn't quite at the summit, just near it, and it sat on a flat clearing with a view that went on for maybe 40 or 50 miles in every direction on a clear day. Garrett showed me the radio, the signal button on the wall, the small propane stove, the cot, the water tank outside that got refilled every 2 weeks. He showed me how to use the Osborne Firefinder, which is a big circular map on a rotating mount that you use to triangulate smoke locations and call them in. He said if I ever saw a fire large enough to warrant it, I'd just press the signal button on the wall and they'll dispatch a crew. But he was very specific about not pressing it for anything else, because a false dispatch cost the service a lot of money and resources. That was basically the whole orientation. Before he drove back down, he handed me a printed sheet with the radio frequency and some contact numbers, and he mentioned, kind of casually, that there was another lookout on the frequency, a guy stationed at a tower to the northeast called Ridgecrest, and that we could radio each other if we needed company or if something came up. He said the isolation gets to some people and it's good to have someone to talk to. The first week was fine, more than fine, honestly. I've never been someone who needs a lot of stimulation. I'm used to being by myself, and there was something genuinely peaceful about the routine. I'd wake up early, make coffee on the propane stove, spend the morning scanning the forest with binoculars, eat something simple for lunch, scan again in the afternoon, read in the evening, and sleep. The view changed depending on the weather and the light, and I found I didn't get bored looking at it. The radio crackled occasionally, service traffic, weather updates, nothing directed at me. I made contact with the other lookout, the guy at Ridgecrest, on my third night. He said his name was Dale. He sounded maybe late 40s, friendly enough, a little slow in the way he spoke, like he was thinking carefully before each thing he said. We didn't talk long, maybe 20 minutes, just basic stuff. How long have you been up there? How's the weather on your end? That kind of thing. I remember he asked me what I could see from my tower, which seemed like an odd question since he'd presumably been up there longer than me and would know the general geography better, but I didn't think much of it. It was around the end of my first week that I noticed the fire. I'd been in bed about an hour, maybe a little more, when I got up to use the bathroom and happened to look out the east-facing window. There was a light out in the forest, orange and clearly flickering, campfire-sized, sitting in what looked like the middle of nowhere. I marked the direction on the firefinder and estimated the distance at around 4 miles, give or take. It was in a roadless area, no trails I knew of, which meant whoever was out there had hiked in. Campfires weren't prohibited in June if conditions were low risk, and conditions were low risk that week, but I was supposed to note any fires I saw and radio them in, so the service had a record. I reported it, got an acknowledgement from the dispatcher, and went back to sleep. The next evening, same thing, same spot, same orange flicker, same time. Maybe 11 or 11:30 at night. I reported it again. The dispatcher said they'd check it out, which I assumed meant they'd send someone by in the morning. Nobody said anything to me the following day, so when the fire appeared a third night in a row, I called it in and then asked the dispatcher directly if anyone had gone out to check. There was a pause, and then she said the area was remote and they hadn't sent anyone yet. I said I understood, but I thought someone should look. 3 nights in a row in the same spot was unusual. She said she'd pass it along. I decided I'd go myself the next morning. I know that probably sounds like a bad idea, and I guess looking back it was, but at the time it felt reasonable. It was a 4-mile hike through accessible terrain. The weather was clear. I had a radio and enough sense to tell someone where I was going. I marked the coordinates on my map, radioed the dispatcher to tell her my plan, and headed out at 7 in the morning while the light was still low and cool. It took me about 2.5 hours to reach the area. The forest was quiet and dry, the kind of quiet that feels full rather than empty. Birds and insects doing their thing in the background, and I followed a creek bed for part of it, which made navigation easier. When I got to the coordinates I'd marked, I found a flat clearing, maybe 30 feet across, ringed by old-growth ponderosa pine, and there was absolutely nothing there. No fire ring, no ashes, no disturbed ground, no footprints, no gear marks, nothing that indicated a person had been anywhere near that clearing. The ground cover was intact, the pine duff on the forest floor was undisturbed, and when I crouched down and looked carefully at the soil near the center of the clearing, it wasn't even warm. I spent about 20 minutes walking the perimeter and looking for anything, a scrap of food packaging, a boot print, anything, but I found nothing. I radioed in, said there was no sign of a fire or any recent human activity, and hiked back. That night the fire was there again. I watched it for a long time that night. It didn't move, it didn't grow or shrink in any noticeable way. It just sat there, flickering in exactly the same spot, the same steady orange glow. I got out my binoculars and stared at it until my eyes dried out. I couldn't see anyone moving around it. I couldn't see any structure or equipment. Just the fire. I radioed Dale that night, not to tell him about the fire specifically, just because I wanted to hear another person's voice. He answered right away, which surprised me a little given the hour, and we talked for a while. I mentioned I'd done a hike that morning and found something strange, not giving him details, and he asked me right away what direction I'd hiked. I told him east, toward a clearing about 4 miles out, and he went quiet for a moment before asking if I was alone when I went. I said yes. He said that was probably fine, and then he changed the subject, asked me about my life before the tower, where I was from, whether I had family, things like that. Normal enough questions, but the way he asked them felt more like he was cataloging information than making conversation. I went to sleep feeling a little off without being able to say exactly why. About 2 weeks in, I was cleaning out the small cabinet under the cot, looking for a spare flashlight battery I thought I'd seen during move-in, and I found a folded piece of paper tucked flat against the back of the bottom shelf. It was handwritten blue ballpoint pen on a piece of loose-leaf paper that had been folded in quarters. The handwriting was cramped and a little hard to read, and at the top it just said "Do Not," underlined twice. Below that were 3 items. The first said, "Do not check the campfire." The second said, "Do not answer the man on the radio." The third said, "Do not press the signal button after dark." There was no name, no date, no explanation. The paper looked like it had been there a while. The folds were worn soft and there was a faint watermark stain along one edge. But it wasn't ancient. A season old, maybe 2. I set the note on the windowsill where I could see it. That night, I didn't go to sleep at my usual time. I sat in the chair by the east window and watched the tree line. And at around 20 past 11, the orange glow appeared in exactly the same place it always did, like it had been there all along and I'd just turned my attention to it. I watched it for a long time, the note on the windowsill, and I didn't radio Dale. Around midnight, the radio clicked on by itself. Not the static and crackle of an incoming transmission, just a single clean click, like someone had keyed the handset and then released it without saying anything. I sat still and didn't touch it. After about 30 seconds, there was another click, and then silence. I turned the radio down, but not all the way off. I sat back in the chair and watched the fire in the trees and tried to think clearly about what I was doing and what I should do next. I thought about Garrett's number in my phone, but the cell signal up here was non-existent, and even if I drove down to where I could get a bar or two, it was past midnight, and I didn't know what I'd even say. I thought about the signal button on the wall and the rule about not pressing it after dark, and I didn't know if that was the previous guy's rule or something that would actually matter. I didn't press it. I fell asleep in the chair sometime after 2 and woke up with the sunrise, the fire in the trees gone. When I got Dale on the radio that morning, he sounded exactly the same as always, and he asked me how I'd slept. I said fine. He asked if anything had come up overnight. I said no, nothing. There was a short pause before he said that was good, and something about the way he said it made me feel like he already knew the answer before he asked the question. I want to say I made some kind of decision after finding that note, some clear-headed choice about what I would do and what I wouldn't, but honestly, I just kept going. That's the thing nobody tells you about situations like this. There's no moment where everything clicks and you think, okay, something is genuinely wrong here and I need to leave. Instead, you just keep getting up in the morning and making coffee and going by the day. The campfire was there every night for the rest of June. It appeared every single night, at the same spot, at the same time. Same orange glow that didn't grow and didn't die. I stopped reporting it to dispatch after a while because I could tell they'd stopped taking it seriously, and I stopped hiking out to check because there was never anything there and the hike was 4 miles each way, and it took most of a morning. I just watched it. I'd sit in the chair by the east window with my coffee and I'd look at it, and eventually I'd go to sleep, and in the morning it was always gone. What changed was Dale. It started small enough that I almost didn't notice. He'd been asking personal questions since early on, where I was from, whether I had family, what I did before this job, and I'd answered most of it without thinking too hard because that's just what people do when they're trying to get to know someone. But sometime in early July, the questions started getting more specific in a way that made me slow down. He asked me once what side of the tower I slept on, meaning which wall the cot was against. I told him the north wall and then sat there for a second thinking about why that would matter to anyone. He asked me once, and I remember this one clearly, whether I ever talked to myself up there, and when I said sure, sometimes. He asked what kind of things I said. I gave him some vague answer and changed the subject. A few nights later, he used a phrase I'd used a few days before. That happens in conversation. People pick up each other's expressions. It's normal. But the phrase was specific enough that it stopped me. I'd said something about the way the afternoon light hit the western ridge and called it a dirty gold color, which isn't a normal way to put it. It was just something I said in the moment. And then 3 days later, Dale used the exact same phrase in a different context, talking about weather coming in, called the cloud cover a dirty gold. I asked him to say that again and he repeated it without missing a beat. Didn't seem to notice that I'd gone quiet. I started paying more attention to what I said on the radio after that. I noticed he was doing it regularly, not every time, but consistently enough that it couldn't have been coincidence. My phrasing, my cadence, sometimes a whole structure of a sentence that I'd used earlier in the conversation, showing up in his mouth a little while later like he was running a delay. I couldn't tell if he was doing it on purpose or even if he was aware of it. He never broke character, never slipped into something that felt overtly wrong. He still sounded like a middle-aged guy on a radio in the middle of nowhere. But the repetitions kept coming. One night I deliberately said something false. I told him I'd grown up in Spokane, which I hadn't, and I described a neighborhood there I'd read about once in enough detail to make it sound real. 2 nights later he mentioned Spokane in passing, said something about how he'd passed through there once and found it quieter than he expected. I said it was pretty quiet where I grew up, and without hesitating he said, yeah, the neighborhood I described, it did seem like it would be. I set the handset down very carefully and sat with that for a while. The next morning, I tried something I probably should have done weeks earlier. I had a laptop with me, mostly for reading and the occasional movie when I had enough battery. And at my next scheduled supply run, I'd have a few hours in town with Wi-Fi access. I'd been putting off the drive because the road was rough and I was settling into the routine of the tower, but I made myself go, bounced down 6 miles of gravel, found a signal, and started looking up everything I could find about Ridgecrest Lookout in the Deschutes National Forest. There's a lot of information about fire lookouts online. Historical records, preservation societies, tourism write-ups, Forest Service documentation. I spent about 2 hours going through everything I could find. I found references to dozens of lookouts in Oregon, old ones, decommissioned ones, ones that had burned down in the 50s, ones that had been converted to recreation rentals. I found a detailed list of currently active lookouts maintained by the Deschutes office. Ridgecrest wasn't on it. I searched specifically for Ridgecrest Lookout in Oregon, then in the wider Pacific Northwest, then with Deschutes National Forest attached to the search, and I got nothing. A few hiking forums mentioned a ridge by that name, but no tower, no structure, nothing. I found a map of all staffed lookout positions active within the last 20 years, and went through everyone. Ridgecrest wasn't there. I sat in the truck in the gravel parking lot of a gas station in La Pine for about 10 minutes after that, trying to think through what this could mean. Maybe it was a name I'd gotten wrong. Maybe Garrett had said something slightly different and I'd misheard. I called Garrett's number. It went to voicemail. I left a message asking him to call me back when he had a chance. Kept my tone casual. Said I just had a question about the frequency setup. He didn't call back that day. I drove back up to the tower. That night I got Dale on the radio and I asked him, as straightforwardly as I could manage, to tell me again which tower he was stationed at. He said Ridgecrest, same as always. I asked him to describe it to me, what he could see from the cab. He described the standard cab-on-a-pole lookout, the kind you see in old photographs, maybe 60 feet up, with a wraparound catwalk and a good view of a long valley to the south. He described it in a relaxed, specific way, the way someone does when they're pulling from actual memory. Then I asked him what the Forest Service contact was for his district, like the main dispatch number. Said I'd been having some radio interference and wanted to make sure I had backup numbers for his end. He gave me a number. I wrote it down. The number had 8 digits. I looked at it for a while, then asked him to repeat it, thinking I'd written it wrong. He gave me the same 8-digit number without hesitation. I said something like, "That doesn't look right." And he said, "No, it probably doesn't." And there was something in his voice right then. Some small shift, not threatening, just different, like a person who's been holding a careful expression for a long time and let it go slack for just a second. Then he said in his normal voice that he might have mixed up the area code, not to worry about it, and he moved on to something else. I slept with the radio off that night. First time I'd done that since I'd arrived. 3 nights later is when he told me he was going to visit. He brought it up naturally midway through a conversation about nothing in particular. Said he'd been thinking about hiking over to get a look at my tower, that he hadn't stretched his legs in a while and the terrain between us looked manageable on a map. I asked him how far he thought it was from his position to mine, and he said maybe 6 or 7 miles through the trees. I said that was a good way for a day hike, and he said he'd probably come at night when it was cooler. Something about the way he said it, just that flat, reasonable delivery, made me want to say something, ask him directly what he was, but I didn't. I said that sounded fine and told him I'd leave the light on. That was a Thursday. Friday night was quiet. Saturday night I went to bed at my normal time, around 11, and I lay on the cot listening to the darkness outside, which in that place was a specific kind of deep darkness, no ambient light for miles, just the forest and the sky. I woke up at 2:30 exactly. I know the time because I looked at my watch the moment my eyes opened, the way you do when something wakes you, and it said 2:29, and a few seconds later I heard the first footstep. It was on the catwalk that goes around the outside of the cab, the narrow walkway with a railing that you access through the door on the south side. The towers are built so that catwalk flexes a little underweight. There's a characteristic creak when someone steps on it. And that's what I heard. That creak. One step, then another, moving along the east side of the cab toward the north. I listened to the steps go around the north corner and continue along the west side. And then they stopped somewhere behind me. There are windows on all four sides. I keep the curtains across most of them at night to block the light when I'm sleeping. And I lay there breathing as slowly as possible. After maybe 2 minutes of nothing, I got up. I pulled on my boots without lacing them, and I went to each window in turn and looked out, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see. The catwalk was empty. The clearing below the tower was empty. The access ladder was up. I always pulled it up at night and secured the hatch, so there was no way to reach the catwalk from the ground without me hearing the hatch open. I checked the hatch. It was still secured from the inside. I went around all four windows twice, but I couldn't see anyone. I stood in the middle of the cab for a while with my boots on, and the lights off, listening. The forest made its normal sounds. Wind in the tops of the pines, something small moving in the brush below, the occasional pop of the structure settling. The footsteps had stopped. After about half an hour, I unlaced my boots and went back to the cot and didn't sleep again until it was light enough outside to see clearly. I got Garrett on the phone 2 days later. Finally. He apologized for not calling back, said it had been a busy stretch. I asked him about Ridgecrest Lookout, told him the man on the frequency had given me that name and I couldn't find it in any records. There was a pause, longer than it should have been for that kind of question, and then he said he wasn't sure what I was talking about, that nobody should be using that frequency except me and the dispatch service, that it was a dedicated line. I said someone had been talking to me on it for 6 weeks. He said he'd look into it. I asked him about the man who had my job before me. He said it was a personal matter and he couldn't discuss it. Standard line, but I pushed and said I'd found a note in the tower, written by hand, and I told him what it said. He was quiet for long enough that I checked the signal to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then he asked me, "What rules?" I started reading them one by one, but he stopped me halfway and said that he'd have someone come up and check on me, probably midweek. That was 4 days ago and nobody has come. Last night I got Dale on the radio. I don't know why I answered. The note said not to, but I think part of me needed to hear what he would say. Needed some kind of resolution to this thing I'd been sitting with for 2 months. He sounded exactly like himself and we talked for a few minutes about nothing, weather and the dry spell, the usual. And then he said he'd had a good walk the other night. I asked him what walk. He said he'd come by my tower like he said he would, just to have a look. Said I had a nice setup, that the cab looked comfortable from the outside. I didn't say anything for a moment. He said it was hard to get a good view through the curtains, but the light I leave on at night makes it easy to find from a distance. Then he said, and he still sounded exactly the same, that he was planning to come again tonight, that the last few visits had been him getting his bearings, learning the approach, seeing how things were laid out, but tonight was going to be different, he said. Tonight he was actually coming inside. He said he'd been waiting a while to do this right, that there was no rush, that he'd learned a lot about me over the summer and he thought tonight felt like the right time. He said he just wanted me to know ahead of time because it was the polite thing to do. I asked him why he was telling me. He said the man before me hadn't known, and that had been a problem. The radio's been off since then. It's been sitting there on the shelf, turned all the way down, and I've been sitting in the chair watching the east window. The campfire is out there right now, same as always. I keep looking at the signal button on the wall. Garrett said not to press it after dark. The note said not to press it after dark, and I've followed that rule the whole time I've been here. But I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking about what Dale said about the man before me. And I'm thinking about the footsteps on the catwalk at 2:30 in the morning, and the empty walkway when I looked. It's midnight. I don't know if pressing the button will bring anyone, or if it'll bring something else, or if it matters either way. Dale is coming tonight, and from everything I've seen this summer, he doesn't say things he doesn't mean.